Welcome back in, guys. This is part 2 of day 2 of the EXP Expo, our 3-day launch party for the comic book shopping experience. We are joined by someone you met earlier today and somebody you met yesterday, two legends in the industry, two people who have worked together for a very long time. We have John Romita Jr. and Scott Hanna here with us. Guys, thank you for coming back and doing a second panel with us.
Thank you. How did the earlier panel go, John?
I didn't FF too bad, so it's not too bad. I'm happy, and Kyle smiled a little bit, and Spencer only made fun of me for about 15 minutes afterwards, so I guess I didn't do that bad.
Yeah, I told Spencer we had to plug him on this interview. So,
Spencer who?
Spencer Beck is our art PR. Yes,
that's right.
He represents John and I, sells all of our original artwork. Really great guy. Highly recommend getting in touch with him if you want commissions or original art from John or I.
That's it. We just did the plug, and now we're done with it.
Right? Actually, this is one of the pieces that we just did together, which I loved your homage to your dad, which was fantastic. This is just a small copy because you did this oversized. But I grew up with this Treasury edition. That was like one of my prize items when I first got that as a kid.
Fantastic work on that, Scott. I love it, love it, love it. We got to think about that in the future.
And actually, since I have you online, I did this just the other day. Do you remember this character?
Yeah.
So tell us the story about the Prowler.
You want to know what cracks me up is the version that I did. Stan kind of poo-pooed it. It's just a costume, no big deal. But I really like that name. Tell your son, what was his name again? Tell your son that I like the name. I swear that was the conversation.
That is so cool.
He's talking to my father, John, and he forgets what my name is, which was comical.
That's
I was 13 at the time, and just pure luck. I never thought it would happen. It was just the name stuck with Stan, and look at the character still around. Unbelievable.
Yeah, they just used it in the movie.
That's right. That's right. Very lucky. Very, very lucky. And an African-American character way back when. You know, that Stan and a couple of the creators really were ahead of their time, and it's fantastic. Just like with Black Panther, and I'm very impressed with Stan, and always have been. But Jack and some of the other artists, they were ahead of their time.
Yeah, I was really happy that we were able to do the last Fantastic Four story with Stan.
That's right.
That was really, well, actually, I'd done 2 smaller things with Stan, but that was my really first ever time doing a full project with Stan Lee. And it
was his last FF.
Yes, it was his last FF. So that was
actually,
definitely.
Just in all honesty, Stan's words were, all right, after working with Romita Jr. and Hanna, this is my last FF. So what's going on, Scott, man? I see your office looks so much better than mine. I got 1 or 2 things behind me.
Well, this is my studio. I actually teach classes in my studio as well as do all my artwork in here. So I have a lot of the paintings and stuff I do, or demonstrations I do for my students. I have actually the dragon over my shoulder is an inking demonstration I did for students. Up on the wall is one of my painted graphic novel covers, and an ink job over the X-Men, and a Joker piece, again, I did as a Facebook Live demonstration, actually. So
I'm simple. The most important thing is not just this. This one here.
Yeah, I can't tell. It's this weird mirror thing. It's like, yeah, this weird thing.
Right. But this is more important than that, only because this is a star that I had named after my wife. Sorry.
Oh, that is so cool. That is great.
I'm a romantic at heart. I also know how to keep myself from getting in trouble.
That's the way to do it, yes.
So, all right, Kyle, have you been listening to our bladder? Are you ready to start talking?
Well, I'm just thinking I'll just take myself out and let you guys go. It'll be the most interesting panel I've ever done.
No, because I know what Scott's going to do. Scott's going to start talking about me. He'll make me talk about him. And I don't know anything about the man. I know he's a teacher and he's a brilliant artist, which is so And the answer to one of your questions, the reason why the product we put out was so good, because there's 2 artists on it, and our color artist makes it 3. And everybody forgets, just because he's called ink artist, you forget that it means artist as well, and that's why it's so good quality.
And one of the reasons I love working with John is John treats it as a collaborative medium. He knows that somebody's going to take his work and kind of run with it, and he enjoys that and lets us do that. The encouragement I get by having a really strong pencil artist like John say, hey, do what you want with it, or take it further, that kind of encouragement you don't get all the time. I wish you did, but that was the old school way of doing things. But when I started, it stopped being that way. Luckily, John learned from his dad, so you still have that philosophy of, hey, let's do a team effort and come up with something greater than any of us can do individually. Like, I can't tell a story like you can, though I've learned a ton from you. Like, actually, most of what I teach in storytelling, I learned from this guy. So.
Thank you. That's nice to hear that, because I can't tell anybody how to ink. But if I tell people how to ink, I have worked with some of the best ink artists in the business in history. I got to work with Scott for a long, long time. I've worked with Klaus for a long, long time. My father inked me. I've been very lucky. And then, of course, Al Williamson and a couple of brilliant artists. So what I can say is, look at the guys that I've worked with and look at the product. I don't know what to tell you other than you need a steady hand. You can't be an alcoholic. You can't be a smoker.
Well, I said on the last panel with Jim Starlin and Jamie Jameson that, there are 2 phrases that we don't hear enough in comics, and it's creative team and art process. Okay. Everybody who touches a page is an artist in some way or another. They're drawing the lines, they're doing the inking, they're doing the coloring, they're doing the lettering. Lettering is an art that's so hard.
Absolutely.
To get right. So
the color artists are now so sophisticated, and yet they're so simplified. Scott and I still have to work on gigantic tables, and we get a mess. I leave graphite marks all over my white walls in this house, and my wife wants to shoot me. Color artists are sitting there with this beautiful tablet, little cup of latte, and it just kind of makes me want to scream. But they're painters.
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
It's fantastic that we get to work 3 guys as opposed to the way it was a long, long time ago.
Yeah, actually, right. one of my favorite color jobs, and I actually tell people that John is tough to color because he's got this amazing mood and setup, but it's not based on like realistic necessarily. He's abstracted to a degree the form. And for a colorist, you don't want to color him like a real person figure or like a flat cartoon figure. It's this weird combination, which some people get, some people don't. But I loved when Laura Martin colored us on X-Men versus the Avengers. She did and truly she is a painter. She's just a phenomenal painter. And she just made her stuff look so gorgeous. Like she'd do a sunset. And it's like, whoa, that looks amazing. And it just elevates the whole product when you work with somebody that fantastic.
And what this does, watching the tools of the trade of color artists now, it does give you the urge to tip your hat to the former color artists who were literally coloring on photocopies and then had to speak to the color separator and etc. They were working with a hammer and chisel, basically, and now they're working with just beautiful tablets and incredible amounts of tools.
I remember even when I was working on Batman in my early days, you could only do so many gradations of color on a page because it cost them too much to do many gradations. So it's like, okay, I can do it for the splash pages, but we can't do it for normal panels because it just wasn't allowed.
Scott, are you still using pen, brush, and paper, or are you using some tablet work? Can you do?
No, I do. So in my teaching, I will use tablets. So I have a small understanding of digital painting and drawing, but all of my comic book work, even if I do blue lines, which is the standard nowadays, I will print out a blue line onto paper, ink it traditionally, scan it back into the computer for the colorist and the letterer, and that way I have an original piece of art. My preferred way is always to get the real pencils, but not many people do that anymore. And even the people who do that don't necessarily get, we don't get to ship it by FedEx every day like we used to, because they're like, oh, it costs too much when they can just send me a digital file. So I always, this sounds trite, but to me, when I get the real pencils of a penciler, part of the soul of the artist is in there. You know, I see the pressure sensitivity, I see the delicacy of all the, you know, is that an important line or a less important line? All these subtleties I can see when I get the real art. When I get a scan, I lose some of that reading. So that means I have to put a little bit more of my own personality into it, which is not necessarily bad for me, but I love kind of connecting with that artist ahead of me. To me, that's a really special thing. Like, I don't know if when we worked together for so long on Spider-Man, that you got to a point where you weren't erasing all of your perspective grid, because you knew I could tell the difference, because you trusted me, I trusted you, I could read your pencils well enough that I was like, why bother with it? This is good. This is part of the process. So we worked together at it, and we learned to understand each other, so you could trust me in a different way than somebody else who's brand new to you.
Well said. Go ahead, Kyle. We want you to join in.
I can't offer anything to this conversation other than to maybe point you guys in a direction. And the direction I want to point you guys in is the Eisner. That you guys won with J. Michael Straczynski on the Coming Home story in Spider-Man.
I got to tell you, in all humility on my end, that title won it. We were a part of it, but that was important stuff that Mike JMS was putting out. Yeah. I do not stand up and say, oh, wow, I won an Eisner. Never. I don't think I've ever won an Eisner as a penciler. I won an Eisner as somebody part of that run of books, and I'm very proud of it, because it look at the time that it was part of, and one very important book that was part of that was the 9/11 issue.
Yeah, absolutely. I was actually on a panel with JMS, and the panelist or somebody from the audience said, what's the most important Spider-Man issue of Spider-Man? And truly, in my mind, yes, I worked on it, but just the team of us, because we were dealing with a totally real event that was viscerally important to all of us, because I lived in New York City for 14 years. You grew up in New York. All of us, it was just such an important thing going on with that issue. And so being part of that, to me, I think is not just an historic thing for Spider-Man, but for me, if I had done nothing else in my career except for that issue, I would have been content, you know, because that was so important and so vital.
Yeah, the reactions to that are stunning, and they're heart-wrenching, and they can choke you up. Kyle, the story that goes how JMS got to the story was because when he was first asked about it, he said, there aren't any words. And that's the main tagline for the beginning of the book. And I love stories like that, because my first reaction was, no, I'm not going to do anything that capitalizes on this. I'm still crying. And I remember talking to my father and talking to my wife, and everybody said, that's crazy. And then it filtered down how they planned on addressing it. And then I heard the story about JMS. I'm very proud of it, and I'm very sad that I'm proud of it. But that kind of thing won the Eisner, the book.
Right. Yeah.
And I'm very proud that I was a part of it. But no penciler would take credit for that as an Eisner winner. Sorry.
Sure. No, I completely respect and understand that thought process. The reason I want to ask about it is because we already mentioned creative team. The creative team, the three of you plus, I know there were some other people who worked on that book, that series as well, whose names I don't have in front of me, but that creative team was so strong. I don't know that a less strong creative team could have handled this kind of work.
Yeah, well,
what was that like? I mean, how did you guys collaborate in that regard? How did the creative team work?
Well, the weird thing is that we turned that issue around really quickly too, because we had, it was a real life event. The Marvel wanted to get this out, so I think JMS wrote the script in a weekend or like in a day. Luckily, John and I had worked together for years, so we were used. But the amount of detail that John was giving me on every page and the reference he was using to get all this stuff accurate and realistic. And then Dan Kemp was doing the colors, and he was doing a phenomenal job on, the cityscapes and the opening splash, double page splash we had is just stunning in the impact and the power and the colors and everything. So the fact that we were a seasoned team already, that we had worked together for a while, I think helped tremendously. The fact that we were all pouring our hearts and our guts into this was really important. And it's just one of those things that we happen to be in the right place at the right time, but because I don't think actually for Marvel at the time, I did something for the book A Moment of Silence. In that I did a story with Mark Bagley. I also did a piece in the Heroes book, which was also dealing with 9/11. And I believe for both of those books, all of the profit was going to donated to the World Trade Center Fund. And one of my most important stories about the Amazing Spider-Man 36 and those other books is that when we first were doing this, we felt helpless, right? Like Spider-Man felt in the story, that we wish we could help and we're just artists. What can we do? We can just draw books, right? But my sister-in-law was actually a counselor at Ground Zero for the people digging up the site. And she said it was really tough for her to open up all the workmen at the site because there are these tough he-men who digging up literal body parts and stuff, and they're taking it out on the family or they're drinking too much or whatever. And she was there to help. And she said, Scott, can you send me all of your Marvel stuff dealing with 9/11? So I actually sent all my personal copies of Amazing 36 to the Ground Zero site. I sent all my copies of Heroes, all my copies of A Moment of Silence. And she actually said it helped tremendously. So to me, that elevated the importance of that book even more, that not that we were just doing a comic book about an important story. We actually, by our talents or skills as storytellers and artists, we were actually able to give a small little effect and help to the people actually working at the site. So the fact that we can do that with a comic book, to me, that's like what our job should be, And I've had more firefighters and police officers come to me wanting me to sign that book or do
military folks.
Yeah, so I've had military, I've had firefighters, I've had police officers. One of the things I sometimes do is I'll do badges with their numbers or friends that they lost during the event. So to me, again, that's what else. It's totally the most important thing I've ever done in my career.
So I'll tell you, I having that on hand, and I'm not doing this for any reason other than hopefully I'll be able to promote this when it happens. Is the only reason I have this sitting here is this is being donated to the local fire department. They had a guy who served on. He went to New York. He was on a certain type of training. He had a certain type of training where he could go into those situations and he knew how to do it safely. And he recently passed, and they're doing a fundraiser for his family. And so this was my personal copy. Send it out and get it graded. It's going to them to raise money. And so when they put that up, I'll be promoting that. But that's the only reason I even have it here is because I think it's so important to give that book to those first responders who do that kind of stuff every day.
I'd like to lighten this up a little bit.
Yeah. Well, we're going there.
The first time Scott and I sat down, I don't remember, when we put our pointed heads together to discuss remarking the whole print run. We kind of chuckled, ha, 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 ha. We had the whole print run, right. Well, here we are nearly 20 years later. I would give my right pinky toe to find out how close we are to getting all of those issues remarked. How much more do we have to go? Another 20 years? I would love to know. We've been remarking, by the way, Kyle, to anybody that's listening, and they may well know this, we've been remarking those covers when they come to us. It's blank black cover. And when it gets put in front of you, I can't just sign it and hand it back. It almost seems superfluous. And I want more than just the signature. And that's where Scott and I come in. I'm dying to know what the numbers are, and probably we'll never find out.
Yeah, I literally, at every show I've ever done, I get multiple copies of that.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Of course, and like, we're not allowed to just sign it. We sign it and have to do at least a little bitty headshot or something, because it's putting a blank canvas in front of an artist is just cruel, because we have to, like, we're forced to wait. There's this big black shape here. We got to put something on there.
Yeah.
You know, that's an interesting question for you guys. I know you've both over your career taken commissions from people. What's the most fun you've ever had when somebody hands you a blank canvas? What's something you've done that just sticks in your mind?
Oh, wow. You said there'd be no math on this test, teacher. Oh, shit. I can't think. Scott, take it. You're the one that's talking the most anyway. Go ahead.
Well, I mean, I just did 2 spectacular pieces that were commissions over John Jr. in that he did 2 homages to his father, which the one I just showed you, which was from the Treasury Edition, and the other one was Amazing Spider-Man 100. And that was just so cool because you captured your father and you still had your personality, your style, and then I got to contribute as a piece to this. And the fact that you now do your commissions at this gigantic size, which just blows me away. It's actually really fun to work that big, but it's just super impressive to whoever gets to frame that and put that up on their wall.
Okay, thank you for saying that, because, yeah, Kyle, if I had to give an answer, that I couldn't think of anything else. Doing the recreations of my father's covers is a joy in and of itself, beyond description, because I get to do stuff, work over stuff that I saw when I was a little guy, and how beautiful it was then. It's still beautiful. It holds up. So thank you, Scott, because it gave me, it's the chance to work on recreations of my father's stuff.
Yeah. And secondly, for me, I enjoy it when my fans actually give me a challenge, because I've worked on literally almost every minor and major character for Marvel and DC over my 3-something decades, and I love drawing the obscure characters. So somebody's like, do the Creeper? I'm like, cool. And Steve Ditko designed that. I think I drew him in the comic books maybe once, but I still remember that character. And he's not like, you don't go on automatic pilot like you do with Batman or Spider-Man. I mean, Spider-Man and Batman are actually a challenge because you try to do it slightly differently than the last 100 times you did it. But I love doing the weird guys, the unusual characters. Actually, I just got a Transformer commission to do right behind my shoulder. And like, I've only drawn Optimus Prime once in my entire career, and they asked me to do commission. So I actually enjoy getting pushed a little bit, getting challenged. To me, that's really fun to say, hey, how do I do this, in a new way, a different way, or take a character that is obscure and make him special to the fan.
All right. Speaking of challenges, this goes way back to what I did. I was supposed to be doing the Olympic issue of 1980. I hate to say this, but it was the Olympics. And then Jimmy Carter backed out of the Olympics, so they changed it to the 1,000,001 characters for the sake of 1,000,001 characters. Anyway, since then, the rumor is that the writers say, well, Romita can do unlimited amounts. So I'm doing Cecil B. effing DeMille in every issue I work on, because they say, well, look, he can handle large groups of people. And now here we are. Challenge. I get Brian Bendis, who did 10 years of close-ups with Mark Bagley. He did just 9 panel pages with faces, and he works with me. I get to do X-Men Avengers. I get to do Action Comics, which turns into a group book. Brian, I love you, but I'm going to rewire your car because you put 10 years on my life. So I get the challenge of doing group books, even when it's a single character.
Actually,
I'm not complaining.
I just worked on Amazing Spider-Man. Just came out last month and this month, and I'm thinking, it used to be Spider-Man was a solo book, and now it's the whole team of 5 female Spider-Man, and there's Miles Morales Spider-Man. It's like, wait, there's now 8 Spider characters, not just one Spider. It's like the Batman. Batman used to be the solo character, now it's the Batman family. So
there it is.
So I have a question. I'm going to ask you to rack your brains, but first I want to throw some people up here. William Pace says, "Hey Scott Hanna, what's up, buddy?" Spencer Beck wants me to ask you a question, but I don't want to get punched through the computer, so I'm not going to do that.
Oh, come on! I gotta hear this. I gotta hear it.
I want to know, does John Jr. die there?
One or two hairs. That's it.
I don't care, but I had to dye my beard this year, so.
Oh God.
There's a reason I don't have a beard is because my chin is white. That's my hair not too bad, but my chin is white. Yeah. My
chin is becoming whiter as I'm less and less facial hair guy because it's becoming whiter. And here, I can't believe this conversation, and I am going to gut punch him when I see him because my beard is silver, and it's starting to creep up a little bit. People think, well, he's got a silver beard and dark hair. That means he colors his hair. And that's exactly the way Spencer Beck speaks.
Guys, if you head to the artistvoice.com and scrolling across the bottom, you can tell Spencer Beck what you think of the question. And then we gotta give Daniel Medina a shout out in Mexico. Greetings from Mexico.
There you go.
Yeah, I had a wonderful time last time I was down in Mexico City. It was just such a joyous convention because all the fans in Mexico were bringing up their books that were like read to death, and and they would still want it signed and say, "This is the first comic book I ever read," or something like that. And the fans were just so wonderful down there. I really, really enjoyed it.
That brings me to 2 questions, but I'm going to ask the first one first. Do you guys remember the first book the first thing you worked on together? And what was that? And how did that first meeting go?
Well, I have a story about this. I'm wondering what John. How does it work from your end?
I don't remember if it was Spider-Man. So be it. But I don't remember if we worked on something else first. I don't remember. I feel bad.
No. Well, So we officially worked together for the very, very first time on Spider-Man. And hold on 1 second. Actually, no, it's in the way. But I had left Spider-Man. I'd worked on it with Tom Lyle. I left it during the middle of the Clone Saga, and they called me up, and they had actually asked me to work over John multiple times when I was working on Cable and still Batman at DC, and I kept saying no because I actually didn't think I could ink John. I had tried inking him when I was first starting out at Marvel, or first starting out as an inker, and I didn't get his style. So I actively avoided every time they asked me to work over John. And then they called me up and said, "Scott, we want you to work on the Spider-Man book as John's regular inker." I'm like, whoa, I've never even inked the guy before. And on top of that, I'm following after Al Williamson, who to me was my all-time favorite inker over John. I mean, he's had many spectacular inkers, but I loved Al's take on John's pencils. It was very unique. And we know Williamson is a phenomenal artist in his own right, but he did these just wonderful things with your skies and buildings and stuff. So he had been inking John on Spider-Man, and I'm coming in after Williamson. I'm like, wait, I've never even inked Romita before in my entire life. I'm coming after the best inker over him ever, and what do I do? So what I did and John never asked for this, so I don't even know if he knew who I was, right? Because a lot of times the editors make these decisions. It's not always the penciler's choice. And John's really humble and nice, so he doesn't pick on stuff. But anyway, so I actually asked for a sample of John's real pencils to work on. So they gave me the cover for Spider-Man. I think I started with you on well, I'm horrible at remembering the numbers. Anyway, we started together on the death of Ben Reilly when we killed the clone, okay. But I did the cover of like the previous issue as my sample.
Okay.
So it was either an issue before or 2 issues before. I did that cover to see if I got your style, and I had matured enough as an artist from my beginning days that I was like, okay, I get it now, I understand it. But then the hardest part for me was to try to not emulate Al Williamson, because I loved what he did over you, and it was like,
it was on Daredevil. I don't think Al ever did ink. Jim Mooney did some inks over me on Spider-Man, but Al was working on me with Daredevil, which was
okay, right. But anyways, but what Al did over you, I loved, and I didn't want to just be a bad copy of Al Williamson. So one of the trickiest things about John pencils is because his pencils are super strong, and he gives you everything you need, but you're allowed to interpret it your way. And so I had to come up with my way of interpreting his artwork that wasn't a Klaus Janson way or a Tom Palmer way or an Al Williamson way. And that's one of the hardest things about working with John. It's like, take what he gives you and interpret it in your version. And luckily, I got to work with him on the various Spider-Man books for, I think we had almost a continuous 10-year run without like a break of any kind. And we both evolve. You know, you get to trust each other, you change styles, you try new things. So it's really cool to see how like I started with him, and then even after we stopped doing Spider-Man, how we would do Avengers versus X-Men or you know, whatever. Is every time it's like, oh, new challenge, get to, you know, try it out a different way or a different look or see where we can go from here. But yeah, that was really intimidating though, because they called me up and said, you're on the book. And I had never worked with him before. And then it turned into a 10-year run. So, yeah.
So,
ask John a question.
We're talking too much. He doesn't have questions. That's how bad it is.
Okay. No, it's not bad at all. It's excuse me, I can feel that cough coming on. But also it's, you know, Scott says something and it gives me 6 questions I want to ask, and then and so my question is John, when your pencils are your style, you have somebody like Scott interpreting your style but embellishing it in the way that they feel is right for the book or in the situation. Do you think about that when you're drawing your pencils, that somebody else is going to come behind you and maybe change things a little bit? Do you leave it a little more open, or do you get real in there?
I don't ever, and first of all, the people that I've worked with, I don't need to be concerned. The only thing I concern myself with is being clear in what I'm trying to do. In other words, down to the smallest of parts of a small panel. If it's not clear, it could be misconstrued by the ink artists and maybe confusing things. And they never blame the ink artist. They'll just always blame me. So I have to make sure it makes sense. But as long as I have guys like Scott, Klaus, even, you know, Tom Palmer, they're artists in their own right. They can repair it without me even and they get it. They know what we're dealing with.
Well, John, do you still write notes alongside?
Oh, yeah. Yes, I do.
That's extremely helpful for the next stage of the process. He'll write, you know, little notations of a particular panel. So we not only do we get the script, but we also get John's notations on his breakdown of the script.
That's interesting. The notes. I've bought a couple of original pieces that have been colored, and there's always notes about the colors. I don't know if I've ever seen notes about the inking,
it's because it's not the inking per se. It's to let the writer and the ink artist know what I had intended for that panel or that page. Sometimes I'll veer from the dialogue intention without actually causing the dialogue to be removed or anything, but might be altered. So if there's an expression on a character, I will write Peter Parker is frowning because of this. But I deliberately tell the story in sequence sometimes by adding extra panels, and I will indicate as so. but it's not because I'm concerned with what the ink artist is doing. It's to let them know what I was intending
Exactly.
and make it easier on them. If Scott wants to throw a furrow on a brow with a little bit of shading extra, I'd like him to know what I had intended for the thought in that panel.
Yeah, and it really does help. It's amazing that one tiny little mark can make a big difference in an expression. And if you're not reading that expression properly, having a notation, having the script is extraordinarily helpful to make sure because my job, in my mind, my job is to interpret John. It's not to interpret me. It's to interpret his intent. The more I get his intent, the easier it is for me to get into his mindset and to interpret it the right way.
So we have a comment from Chuck Morgan who says, "Hi, John. You're one of my favorite artists ever. I'm still inking over some of your pencils from a Marvel tryout book, and that Scott's great too."
I still have the Marvel tryout book too. And what's funny to me is I was young enough to need the Marvel tryout book when I was doing it, and I probably could have used it. There's a couple of guys that have used it to get their. As a matter of fact, Bagley claims that that's what got him that his samples with the tryout book he used when he was applying to work for the company. That's fantastic. So that's good to hear that. I like to hear that. And it was a brilliant idea by Marvel to do that, showing the grades and the steps.
And then we have a comment from Anthony Vito. I'm going to read it the way I think he meant it. "I wish yous were on ASM again."
Hey, Vito, Kumba. I actually would love, listen, never say never again, but I would love to do Spider-Man someday. That would be outstanding to go back. I would love it.
Yeah, and Spider-Man has always been, well, my two favorite characters have always been Batman and Spider-Man, but I've spent longer on Spider-Man by far than any other character. And it's such a rich character with such great villains and so much potential that it's literally a joy to work on that character anytime I get the opportunity. And to do something like that with John would be like even more spectacular because again,
now I'm in trouble. I'm in trouble with DC now because of what I just said.
Oh, yeah. Well, I work for both companies at the same time.
I'm a freelancer. Yeah, I'm not offending anybody. It's okay. I talked to Kyle about doing Doctor Strange a couple hours ago. Always wanted to do Doctor Strange. Always wanted to do Wonder Woman. These characters have always wanted to get back in. And listen, there's no mystery to this. I would love to do Daredevil again because of how much fun I had doing Daredevil.
Yeah, and Daredevil is actually one of those characters that I've always loved the characters, but I very rarely touch the character. I think I did like 6 issues in my entire career, which is, for me, that's a really small amount. And whereas you had a really big impact on the character.
That Man Without Fear book with Frank was as much fun I had so much fun on it, and I enjoyed it so much when it came out that they just sent another release of it, hardcover, and I open it up and I look at it and I say, wow, between Al Williamson and Frank, this is a good product. I'm really proud of that. So the Daredevil character to me is as iconic as the Batman costume because of the horns. That's great silhouette. One of the best silhouettes of all time. Daredevil and Batman.
Yeah.
So, and then we just got the question, and I think we just answered. If you were to collaborate again, what comic would you like to work on?
That's an easy question. I would do anything to work with Scott on Spider-Man again. I would, but that's got to be at the right place and the right time.
Oh, yeah.
Spider-Man, of course. Just because I see how. Listen, Scott hasn't lost this. Scott, turn your head. I don't want anybody hearing this. Scott hasn't lost a step, and he's 85 years old. He looks like
yeah, I don't look that good for my age. No.
We would both love to try it again someday. So never say never.
Well, yeah, to me, literally every single time I've had the opportunity to work with John, I've just enjoyed it because he's literally a one-of-a-kind penciler that I cannot compare him to anybody else. He's so distinctive in his strengths, in his storytelling, and like I said, his collaboration quality. The fact all those strengths together means that every single opportunity I get, I'm ecstatic. I'm like, I look forward to pages saying, wow, I get to have, I mean, I have fun in my job every day, but I really get to have fun when I see Romita Jr. pages on my tabletop. And the fact that we usually still work together in real pencils and real inks. So I get to touch that real paper that John was working on. To me, that's getting to be a rarer and rarer pleasure. And so,
nice to hear that.
So again, anytime I get the opportunity to work with John, to me is great. But yes, Spider-Man is iconic. That I think we made together a really big impact on the history of the character, and to add even more to that history would be, you know. But again, right time, right place, whatever. You know, my philosophy in comics is I've been around for so long. If it's meant to be, it's going to happen at some point. We can't control it necessarily. It's just, you know, you stick around long enough, it will come to you, you know?
Amen. Well said.
So as a not getting into the weeds question, you talked about visiting Mexico for a convention. What has been in your career your favorite comic book convention, or what's one that you've maybe been to once and would love to go back to again? We're all looking forward to when we can go back to things.
I got to start that one because I hate to interrupt you, but this is so clear in my mind. Sao Paulo, Brazil. I've never encountered a convention that size, run that well, and people so sweet. Now, all the conventions I've been to, people are sweet. But to have something this size, continent-wise, everybody from all over South America was coming in, and there have been the different shows in the different countries. But my wife and I enjoyed Sao Paulo so much, stunningly. And I would do it again in a second. We were about to, but things changed with the virus. And the next time we have the opportunity, I will jump at the chance. Just so you know, people in Sao Paulo, I want you to know that the one complaint that my wife had is that we didn't get a chance to do the helicopter ride. We had to go in traffic. And Frank Miller got a chance to use the helicopter. Sorry, you got to please the wife next time. You got to put us in a helicopter. It was a 2-hour drive cross city because of our hotel being where it was and the convention center. And we sat in traffic. Now, being New Yorkers, it wasn't a problem. We were used to that shit. But that's my one complaint. But I loved every second of that convention. 350,000 people for the weekend, 4-day weekend, something insane.
Yeah, I was unfortunately planning on going to that show like last year or this year. And yeah, look at what's happened now. But I've never been there yet. I've heard nothing but phenomenal things about it. And I actually don't think I have a particularly favorite show, but I really, up until recently, I wasn't doing all that many shows. I would normally concentrate in the Northeast where I live. So I would always do New York Comic Con. There's a couple of fantastic smaller shows like Garden State Comic Fest in New Jersey. I love Heroes Con because it's all about the artists, and you get to hang out with all. To me, it's wonderful. It shows not just to see all the fans, which are spectacular, but to see all your other coworkers and buddies. They're people that I've worked with for decades and never met them in person. And then I'll see them and I'll have this long conversations like, wait, who are you? And then we finally figure out, like, oh, that's who we are. But that to me is a real pleasure. That's one of the reasons why I love Heroes Con, because it's all about the artists getting together as well.
Terrific Con is spectacular as well.
That's another one, yeah.
And to know, and Spencer Beck has nothing to do with it, but that's it's despite Spencer Beck, it's a terrific con.
I think the thing is I asked the question because I think we are all waiting with bated breath for the day when we can go back to doing those things.
Oh,
so,
very well said. Very well
said.
You
know, it's one of those is which one are you dreaming about? Like for me, it's C2E2 in Chicago, just because I have a deep dish deficiency now. We've got a very great New York transplant who opened a pizza shop here in town, so I don't miss New York style pizza from New York Comic Con. I've got a deep dish deficiency, so that's my answer. But back to the work. who have been some of the favorite color artists you've gotten to work with? We haven't talked about that. We've talked about inkers, and we've talked about
My wife just waved hello.
hello. We've talked about
We were talking about you, Kat.
I'm not listening, you guys, but okay.
We were talking about you and the helicopter complaint in Sao Paulo.
Oh boy. Yes, they just didn't get you there fast enough. It took too long. Bye. I'll let you go, honey.
Okay.
So
Sorry,
we've talked about. I talked with Scott about who he's worked with. I've talked with John about who he's worked with. Let's talk about the colorists. Are there colorists that you feel that, especially in your time together, really brought something extra to the table?
I'm going to start with the two guys that I enjoyed, and this is not to say that there are spectacular color artists, but Dean White and Peter Steigerwald, the three of us have bonded in our work. In the work, they are highlight guys, and I would get a chance to work with either of them anytime. The other color artists that I've worked with, I've never had a bad experience. So I love everybody that I've worked with, but those two guys, because we go way back, if I had to pick two, I would pick those to start with.
Yeah, for me, there are really too many to list. Particularly when I was working with John, I absolutely loved what Laura Martin did. I think she is one of the absolute best in the entire industry. Anytime I know her name's on a project I'm on, I'm just like in heaven because I know she's going to make my work look better. And that's the, some colorists will make your work look worse. Some will make it look good or like as good as it is. Some will actually improve the process. And fortunately, I've worked with, a vast number of spectacular colorists that do that latter bit, that they take the black and white artwork, read our intent with our values and our depth and our lighting, and then make it even better. I love it when a colorist will properly interpret what my guidelines are. Like I'm an old school inker, so when I do a line weight, it should be telling the colorist, oh, the light source is here. Or if I'm doing, particular things with depth or texture, I want them to understand that and read it. And colorists actually get a lot of, they have the worst pressure of everybody because they're the last person in the line, and they're frequently told like, oh yeah, do the whole book in a weekend. It's like, oh, come on, how do you do a good job under those circumstances? So when they have these horrible deadlines and they still manage to pull off a great job, is just spectacular. And so I don't blame them when sometimes they have to rush it. It doesn't look spectacular. Sure. But when they can pull it off, and there are certain people, when you hear those names, it's like, oh, I have nothing to worry about. And to me, because I do painting and I understand color really well, frequently you get in your head a particular idea of what you think is going to be on the page. And sometimes I've had some colorists read me exactly and do exactly what I had already in my head. And sometimes the colorists will go in a totally different direction. And I'll be like, wow, I never even thought of that. And you made it work so beautiful, And that's what, to me, is what's so special about a collaboration is that every artist gets to add their input and make it a better product.
Yeah. All right, perfect example of the great experiences I've had recently. Action Comics was Brett Anderson, and I honestly, maybe the tools are more sophisticated, but the work he's constantly checking in with me, and I always enjoyed that. But his work was spectacular, especially his covers. So, Brad, I tip my hat to you. Fantastic work. Fantastic work.
All right. So I said I was going to get in the weeds, and I'm going to get in the weeds now. This is where we're headed. You guys have more experience on Spider-Man than almost anyone I could ever hope to talk to. But every Spider-Man artist, every Spider-Man, on any level of the art process, has a different take on how to draw the web.
The webbing on the costume?
Yeah, on the costume or the hand?
any of them. They're all different. Everybody's a little different. The costume changes a little. What comes out of the hands changes a little. How did you approach it? And then Scott, how did you approach adding the inks?
I honestly had a certain amount of lines on the face and webs on between each of the lines, because I sometimes do panels that repeat, so you have to make sure that they're consistent. Now I just did 200 commissions, and some of them are, well, a majority of them were Spider-Man close-ups. They all have the same amount of webs on them. I just learned, literally following my father, to draw the webs counter to the curve of the body, so it doesn't look like it's a soft surface. That's just a pet peeve, and I try to be consistent with the webbing, and I'm sure Scott has fixed many of my F-ups.
Yeah, the inkers job, and I've not only worked with John a long time in Spider-Man, I worked with Mark Bagley a long time in Spider-Man. I worked with, I think when I was on Spider-Man, I worked on every single Spider title there was, including sometimes more than one a month, and every artist does it differently. So I think John's was probably what he learned from his dad about the reversing and the more simple lines was kind of my go-to. But when I first started on Spider-Man, it was with Tom Lyle, and he did totally different webbing. He would always put highlights on the costume, and he would do different shaped eyes. So again, as my inker self, I have to adapt to what the penciler gives me. So if I'm working with Bagley, I can't ink him or the webbing the same way as when I work with Romita. When I work with Eric Larson, it's going to look different. When every single artist has their own interpretation, and that's one of the magical things about the character. That you think Spider-Man is a relatively simple design. I think it's actually a brilliant design by Ditka. That the fact that there's a stripe going down the arm shows the twists and turns of the arm, right?
I think Kirby created the costume.
Okay, well,
in its infancy.
But anyway, the design is simple, but it's vastly adaptable, and that's what makes it a cool character. Just like Batman, simple, basic premise, but you can do it in hundreds of different variations. And that's why I think one of the reasons why Spider-Man is still a popular character, because we can update him, we can change him. There were times during our run on, I think it was Peter Parker, where the editor was saying, it's like, oh, you got to make him thinner, right? We were making him a little more muscular. They said, no, you got to make him thinner. So we made him, we adapted, we changed. So there were different times in our run on the book that we did it slightly differently. And that's how it works. So yeah, to me, that's why I like the character, because he can change it up and not, break any rules.
We got a few minutes left here. So I have one more question, but I just want to give another shout out to the artistchoice.com and Spencer Beck for helping us to get all these guys, these wonderful artists and creators here this weekend to talk to.
Despite his ball-busting questions, yes, I agree.
Right. Despite being a troll in the comments.
Don't open your car door tonight, Spencer. I got too many cousins that live in Connecticut.
And I will tell you guys that Spencer Beck will be appearing on a show on our network on Thursday with Nick Barucci and Will Gabrielle talking about original art and talking about these wonderful creators. So make sure you tune in for that. But I got to do my job, otherwise I'll get in trouble. So, so let's go back one more time to the working together. Was there ever a time where one of you had to make a phone call to the other and be like, really? What are you doing?
I never called Scott about that.
Yeah.
If anything, I've called him to compliment him. Never had to do that. Excuse the expression, had to. I don't think I've ever called any ink artist. I've been very fortunate. Like I said, I listed the guys I've worked with, just like the guys I've worked with as writers. I have been blessed with some of the great artists that worked with me. No, Scott doesn't need to have anybody call him on anything. He's brilliant.
I think the only thing I ever met one time, because I'm married to a fashion designer, I think I mentioned to, and John is, by the way, fantastic at doing.
I know where you're going with this. Go ahead. Go.
Well, anyway, I was always impressed that John could draw people in suits better than anybody else. Like, he understands the bulk of the clothes, how it goes over the body, whereas a lot of comic book artists have never worn a suit in their lives, so they skin tight things and they don't know how.
I know where you're going. I know where you're going with this.
So John was always great at drawing suits and these thugs and guys in normal outfits. But because my wife's a fashion designer, I had to call John up. I forget whether we did this in person or on the phone. And I said, John, I hate to say this, but suit cuffs do not have just one button. Men's suits always have at least 3 buttons. Usually, the better quality have 4. And
True story.
On that, he fixed it, and I've never seen him do a 1 button anymore. He always does at least.
That is the damn truth, and he's right. And it was at first I said, I can't believe he's calling me on this, and then I ended up. I swear to God, I went in and looked at my suits in my closet. And he's right. I had 1 button on 1 suit because I was in a bar fight and it got ripped off. I'm kidding. But perfect example, and it is he's right. 100% accurate, that story.
But also, it's because I knew John would care because he actually does use reference and he uses, he looks at real things when we're drawing stuff. It's not just, we don't just make this up out of our head. We actually, pay attention to the real world. And again, there are some pencilers I couldn't say that to. Not that I ever needed to say anything to John, but the fact that he was willing to listen to the inker and about this minor little thing, and he immediately fixed it. And like I said, I think he's fixed it the entire rest of his career because that was just this tiny. So yeah, in 20 years of working together, I mentioned one thing, never had to, and again, I didn't have to mention that. It was just one of those things that I knew he would appreciate the feedback.
Great story.
Yeah, those are the stories that people love to hear. Well, John Romita didn't know how many buttons were on a suit. That's the only mistake he ever made. Like, those are the stories people love, right?
Hey, listen, if you're gonna F up, it might as well be buttons on cuffs.
Right? I mean, it's better than the story of, he forgot to put the web on the suit the one time.
Wait a minute. Here's a great story. The greatest mistake ever made that I ever saw was by Jack Kirby. There is a close-up splash of Mr. Fantastic with his stretching arm going right at the reader.
Right.
On a splash page. And it's the wrong hand. He had 2 left hands. And what's funny is the backhand of Mr. Fantastic is so far in the background, you wouldn't have paid attention to it normally. But my father was the editor on it, or I forgot what made, and he says, "What do you see wrong with this splash?" And I didn't notice it until he pointed it out. But it's so glaring. It's 2 left hands. It's comical.
Hey,
one of the great all-time mistakes.
With his hand around. Yeah, that's it.
Yeah, exactly.
All right, we got just a couple minutes left. Ron Lim is patiently waiting his turn here. We got another legend coming up next.
Ron Lim is a patient man. Ron, how are you, boss? Glad to hear it.
Let me bring him in.
How's your wife and my kids?
Hey, Scott. Hey, John. How you doing, guys?
Good to see you, Ron. It's been way too long.
Yeah, no doubt, for sure.
All right.
We'll get going. Let you take
Real quick, guys, tell us where people can find you, what you got coming out here in the last minute or so, what you got coming out, where people should be looking for you.
Go ahead, Scott, because I don't have anything I can talk about. I already mentioned it a couple hours ago.
Okay, I'm working on Amazing Spider-Man, Werewolf by Night, working on Savage Avengers for Marvel, just did the fantastic Generation Shattered for DC with Ivan Reyes, which actually John was part of that too. Really wonderful story and group effort of all the teams on that. You can find me on Facebook or Instagram, and you can find our artwork at theartistchoice.com.
Beautiful. Well said.
And then John talked about it earlier. He's got a book coming out soon with Howard Chaykin, hopefully. We've got some other stuff that he can't talk about, but should be watching. At John Romita Jr. on Instagram, at Inker Scott on the social medias, Inker Scott 1, and theartistchoice.com if you're interested in their original art. Guys, thank you so much. It's been an honor to meet both of you. This day, I'm just kind of shaken. Like, I've gotten to talk to so many greats, and I've got another one coming up that I'm so excited to talk to. This has been 12-year-old Kyle, his head is exploded. So we will.
Our pleasure. Trust me, our pleasure.
Yes,
We will see
definitely.
you all. We will see you all very, very, very soon in
Well,
person.
I'm gonna
Thank
go
you
cook
so
a
much.
Sunday meal for my wife. Be good.
right.
Be good, guys.
Take care, guys.
All right, guys, stay tuned. In just about a minute's time, Ron Lim will be joining us here on the EXP Expo Day 2. I have to remember to click the things when I say that. It's getting out of hand, everybody.